Assalamu alaikum. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks, everybody, for coming. I'm going to actually shut the door. All right, assalamu alaikum, everybody. My name is Raima Amin. I'm a neurologist in the community, and I'm also the president of Muslim Health Professionals, and so we're helping to co-host this event here at MAPS with MCRC. We really appreciate everybody coming out to attend this talk on what we feel is a very important issue, and our hope is that this is only the first of many more conversations on this topic. I think just in the process of promoting the event, we found that there was a lot of interest and a lot of questions about, if we are going to cover this aspect of the topic, if we're going to invite so-and-so and so-and-so. And I was honestly amazed to find how many experts and how many people we have in our community working on this topic and how much interest there is. So our hope is that this is only the first of many more talks on the topic, both at MAPS and at other different community centers amongst the Muslim community. So we're not going to take up the whole time talking. We want a portion of this to be dedicated to hearing your voices. So please, write down your thoughts. We're going to pass around some note cards, actually, where you can write down your thoughts or questions. And keep those in mind towards the end of the talk. And also, if you have feedback about what you would like to hear about in our future programming on this topic, please let us know. We would love to hear that. So I'm just going to kind of briefly introduce the speakers here. We have here Dr. Ahmed Abdurazak. He's a psychiatry resident here at the University of Washington and has been really involved in this work. I'll let him speak more about that. Here we have Adriana Muhammad. She's a parent in our community and somebody that has a lot of lived experience on this topic through her family, and so we're really grateful to have her insight and her input. We have Senny Rose, who is the program coordinator for the Washington Include Collaborative, which I'm trying to get this right. I need help already. Okay.
I'll introduce myself.
Sure, sounds good.
Think about it. So, okay. Well, hello everybody, and my name's Jim Mancini, and I want to thank Rima for inviting us. And kind of a funny story. So there were supposed to be two of us that were here. Dr. Gary Stobie was also supposed to be here. And, we had all these preparatory meetings, and I missed almost every meeting because I just, for whatever reason, didn't, organize myself. And I'm here, and Gary's not, okay? So I get the credit, Rima, for showing up this time, okay? I'm so happy to be here. I'm so thrilled. This feels like I've been doing this for many years, and this is the first time I've gotten back out since COVID. So I just can't tell you how appreciative I am to be here, and this is just a passionate topic for me. So been working. I'm a speech language pathologist by training. Been working in diagnostics of autism spectrum disorder and communication disorders for over 20 years now. Was working at the Seattle Children's Autism Center until last summer. And then now I am over at the University of Washington and get to work here with my great partner, Stini, as part of the Washington Include Collaborative. And Include stands for the Inclusive Network of Community Leaders with a focus on the underserved and disability education. And one of our favorite things to do is to come out to places like this and communicate with people from various communities. We have such a rich and diverse group of communities here in Seattle, and representing the medical field is, I know there's not a lot of trust sometimes, and I know that people have not had the best experiences at Children's Hospital, going to the University of Washington, and I'm hoping that this is the beginning of earning trust, and that's really what we are here to do. I think that previously we thought, wow, they would trust us because I'm, the doctor or the speech language pathologist. And we've switched that to saying, we are here, we want to be present, and we want to support your community, and we hope to earn that trust. So we're going to talk about autism very specifically, and then we'll kind of layer a little bit in intellectual disabilities. I know there may be people here who have expertise. We're not covering it all in detail, and I do hope that we're going to be able to be more specific in the future and really give the community what they're looking for. So why don't we go? I'm going to nod at you and just be like, make eye contact with you, Sini, and that's like, that means you switch to the next one. All right. Nonverbal communication, right? That's one of the big things that we think about when we come up with autism. So I'm going to speak a little bit, and how are people familiar with what autism is? Is there anybody here that doesn't know the word autism or the idea of autism spectrum disorder? And man, a couple of years ago, people would be raising their hands, I would say. So we've done a pretty good job of raising awareness around what autism is, and it's become much more common to talk about it and to know about it in the community. I'm looking forward to hearing, from Adriana and from Ahmed here, because I'm here to learn too, and I think that's one of the great opportunities to come to a place like this and be able to hear and understand and learn from everybody. So when we think about autism, we're going to think about these two different areas, okay? And and they're represented here by these circles. So when we think of the term social communication, okay? And I already told you I'm a speech and language pathologist, but when we say the word communication, we're not talking about like the speech. We're not talking about sounds that come out that get formed into words, right? We may also not be talking about language, right? And I love being in a place where people speak multiple languages, like my friend Sini here, is that because words are symbols, right? And if I say the word apple in English, right, everyone has a picture and a symbol of what that means, right? But Raza, can you say what apple is in Arabic? Yes, and I wouldn't understand that because I don't understand Arabic, right? But everybody who does understand Arabic would be able to have the same symbol, right? But autism is not necessarily a language-based disorder either, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, okay? But when we're talking about communication, right, this is how language becomes social during interactions, okay? And this is one of the things that is very hard for people who are on the autism spectrum, okay? And there's a word here, after number 1. This word is reciprocity, okay? And reciprocity, what it means is the back and forth, right? The back and forth of how we communicate, the back and forth of how we interact, both verbally, right, using the words that we have, but also non-verbally, right? I see Adriana nodding her head. That gives me a message to say she agrees with me, right? Or at least she's understanding what I'm talking about, right? We are always doing that, right? Getting feedback, taking that information, and then using it to carry on that social interaction, right? And kids with autism, people with autism struggle with that, right? They may get really focused on something else that makes it hard for them to attend to the social interactions that are going on around them. And interactions can feel very one-sided, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about how these behaviors manifest themselves. But what we see is that it's different. When kids are young, what we might be looking for is how easy is it to engage with the child, right? Do they do their own thing? Is it really hard to get them to respond to their name or to follow instructions, and they just have their own plan, right? Going off and doing what they want, and it's very challenging to get them to listen, or to respond, or to get them to do what you want them to do, right? As you get older, we might think about a conversation, right? And how conversations are back and forth, right? You ask a question, they answer a question, I say something, you can either ask a question or you could tell me something that is similar to what your experience is around that. We take our lived experience, our memory, our knowledge, and we use that to be able to carry on these back and forth interactions, right? Even in the supermarket, right? It's an interaction. If you go to the checkout place, right? And there's a set of rules that we all kind of know how to follow. And if you say you come in and you're new to a place. I went to Egypt once, and it was interesting for me because I had to kind of learn some new rules, right? Socially, what socially, culturally was happening in that area, in that place. And I've gotten the luxury of traveling around the world and doing talks like this. And it's been wonderful to kind of go and learn and learn about these new rules, these social rules, right? So this reciprocity also involves how you think about and express emotions, right? And I will talk about some of the myths about autism, okay? And one of the myths about autism is that people with autism don't feel emotions, right? Often people with autism feel very strong emotions, right? To the point where it's a little overwhelming, right? They might have a hard time managing those emotions or regulating those emotions or being able to pick up on the emotions of other people, right? If somebody's frowning at me, right, I'm going to pick up that, I must have done something wrong, right? They're upset with me for something, and then I might think about, what did I do, right? I made a mistake, or I said something rude, or whatever, right? Kids with autism might not pick up on that, looking at the nonverbal, studying the interactions, the facial expressions, the gestures, and the affect of other people, right? And that's what gets in the way of some of these other areas that we're going to talk about, okay? So does that make sense? Anyone have any questions kind of about this idea of reciprocity? Because I think if we were going to boil what's hard for people with autism, it is this word reciprocity, right? It is the ability to have this easy back and forth interaction that sustains and builds on itself and is how we interact socially. Okay? Go ahead. Yes, or comment. Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. Okay, absolutely, and that's such a good point, right? And when we get to different treatments, so we're going to talk a little bit about treatments, and there are treatments that use very behavioral methods. One's called applied behavior analysis, ABA, if you've heard of that, therapy, or that treatment approach. So yes, and I would also say, behavior is communication, and communication is behavior. Right? When we use words, or if I'm pointing, this is a behavior that I'm using that we can all agree on. This means something, right? So, and absolutely, when you have a child who has autism or difficulty communicating, right, they are going to use different means of communication to be able to get what they want. And sometimes that communication is, I'm throwing something on the ground, or I'm going to scream, or I'm going to have a little tantrum, right? Because they do not have the ability or the access to the communication skills that they already have, okay? So, when kids are young, they might kind of take someone by the hand and bring them places, right? It's a very immature way of communicating, but it is communication, right? And it's also intentional communication, right? We are not interpreting that behavior. They are actually doing something that allows you to say, oh, they must want to go to get something to eat at the refrigerator. I'm dragging you, I'm putting your hand on the refrigerator. That means to me, and parents all know what their kids want, right? Parents, moms, dads are the best at interpreting their child's behavior, and we'll talk a little bit about that when we get to treatment as well. So thank you for saying that, because I think it's really important, okay? I'm going to move on to the nonverbal communication part of it, right? A lot of people, we get really stuck on verbal communication, using words, right? And yes, it's very important. And yes, very often, this is what brings parents to the doctor is, my child's not talking, right? Not every child with autism speaks on time. And not every child with autism has a language delay, right? That's why they call it a spectrum of autism. But one thing that we often see in kids with autism is this difficulty with nonverbal communication. And what I'm talking about with nonverbal, I'm talking about how you use gestures like pointing, like waving, but also your facial expressions, right? Your body language, and especially your eyes, right? And I think that this is one of the big things, again, one of the myths about autism, and one of the things that we used to hear doctors say a lot is, oh, your child couldn't have autism because they're looking at me, right? Your child couldn't have autism because they're smiling at me, right? Kids with autism smile, right? And they smile at people when they're happy with them, right? And they like what they're doing. Kids with autism do use a variety of different uses of eye contact, right? It may not be sustained, it may be somewhat inconsistent, but the fact that the idea that children with autism don't use eye contact at all or avoid eye contact isn't true. It happens for sure, but it's not necessarily what we see in all of autism, okay? And one of the big things that we do when we're looking at, all right, this child comes in with a language learning delay, is we look at those nonverbal skills, right? And that is what differentiates us from saying, all right, this child's a late talker, because they may use some really strong nonverbal communication, right? They may be really good at getting their needs met and communicating and showing things to people, right? Communicating for different reasons, yet they're not using the words to do it. So they might use a lot of pantomime, they might be really descriptive with how they use their gestures, right? They will use very good eye contact and lots of facial expressions, almost dramatically, to be able to get their communication across. Whereas children with autism may have language delays, and they also have deficits in this area of nonverbal communication development, okay? So any questions or comments about the nonverbal here? Okay, sorry about that. Thanks, Sini. I usually project pretty well, so, but I'll put it closer to me. Okay, and I would say that these first two areas really often results in difficulties with this number 3 here, right? Which is developing of relationships. So how you make friends, right? Your interest in having friends, being friends with other people, right? Their ability to sustain and maintain friendships, relationships, interactions for periods of time. And this is another thing that can really vary, right? We could have kids who are very socially avoidant, and we can also have kids who really desperately want to have friends, yet they struggle with knowing the rules, knowing how to do it in a way that is going to be effective, okay? So that is this, if I was going to sum, though that's what we're summing. And again, we're doing this really quickly. If we wanted to, we do all-day courses on this at the university. So I'm doing it in a big, very, very shallow and very quick, but I wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of what we're talking about, okay? So social communication, I'm sorry I'm losing my voice. I don't know where my voice, must have been talking too much today already. So that's that one area, okay? So, but this other area is also very important when we're thinking about making this diagnosis and the characteristics of kids that we see who are on the spectrum, okay? And interestingly, for us to feel the diagnosis is appropriate, you have to demonstrate all deficits or differences in all 3 of those areas of social communication, whereas in the second part, which we call repetitive behavior and restricted interests, we only really need to see 2 of these for us to feel, all right, well, this child would meet the criteria for an autism diagnosis, okay? Repetitive behaviors is something where and this can manifest themselves in very different ways. When kids are younger, they might want to have things always the same. They might like to line up cars. They might like to play with the same toys over and over again. Repetitive behavior could also be how they use words to communicate. There's something called echolalia, which is the repeating of the words that other people say. And this is also a communication purpose, right? When kids repeat the words of others, there's often a reason or a function. It may be to say yes. It's easier to repeat the words of somebody else rather than saying the word yes, okay? Or it could be a way to help them process information. Someone gives them an instruction, they repeat it. And that's actually a really good strategy. We teach kids to do that when we are working on following directions in receptive language and that sort of thing, okay? But those are just some examples of repetitive behavior. This can look very different in every kid. So that there's a whole slew of different characteristics and how that behavior manifests itself in how kids act can be really variable. And it's one of the tricky things I think about making the diagnosis is be able to say, is this a repetitive behavior? You know, the kid really likes cars. You know, is that unusual for boys? The kids love Minecraft or love video games. Very common these days. It has to be above and beyond and so restricted that, man, this is the only thing. And this is where when we get to this, I'm actually jumping ahead a little bit to number 3, which is real fixations, real restricted interests. I only want to do this. I only want to talk about this, right? When you have a conversation, the conversation's always coming back to the things that I feel that I want to talk about, right? And this is where it gets, goes back to the reciprocity a little bit, because a conversation doesn't flow very well when I only want to sit here and I just want to talk about video games over and over again and the different video games that are coming out or the different video games that I like to play, and it's all video games, right? So that fixated or intense interests is another thing. It has to be to the point where it's getting in the way of them learning other things. And I think that's really important to recognize that autism is a disability, right? And it's getting in the way of them reaching the same stage as other children, their age. And, it could be in school, but it also could mean their ability to have friendships, right? And you see these differences when you compare them to other kids, right, who we call typically developing, okay? I'm going to go back to the second one because I think this is a really important one, and it's this insistence of sameness or rigidity, okay? And this is where the kids think, I just want things to be consistent. I want things to be the same, and I might get upset if things change, especially unexpectedly, right? And we all want things to be the same, right? We all want things to be consistent. None of us want to walk into, work this day and say, oh, this is, instead of, Dr. Razak, instead of doing child psychiatry today, you are instead going to be delivering babies. No, it's not good. You'd be like, oh my God, I can't do that. That's not really comfortable for me, right? Take that to the extreme, and in every single day where a child has to transition from being home to going to school, and being in school all day and different activities and different things, some of which they don't want to do, right? And then they've got to transition back home, and then they go back to different activities or visits or whatever, and there's a lot of these things. And sometimes you're like, I got to stop at the store. I can't just drive home. I got to stop at the store. And that can lead to behavior, right? And going back to the communication, right? They may not have the ability to communicate, I just wanted to go home, right? I'm tired, I just want to go home, right? But instead, they see you take the wrong turn, right? And then there's a tantrum in the back, and you're like, what is going on? And then it's all, well, he or she were expecting to go in a certain direction, okay? So this rigidity that we talk about, or this insistence on, preference or insistence of being the same, can lead to some real challenging behaviors, right? And as we go through these, and if you're thinking about kids that you know who might be on the spectrum, some of these are going to be characteristics, right? Some of these things are things like, yeah, that sounds like my kid, right? But they may not be the big obstacle to their learning, okay? Sometimes they are, social emotional reciprocity, the kids who are really working on social skills, working on communication, you could say that is the biggest obstacle, but they might be kind of flexible. Maybe they don't have these big tantrums because they can kind of go with the flow a little bit better, right? But there's often times where that rigidity leading to behavior and leading to the inability to go and do things, that's the big obstacle. So as I'm going through these things, right, as we talk about autism, what I want you to be thinking about, and this is very, very important, is some of these things that we use to make the diagnosis are characteristics that help us make the diagnosis, but may not be the things that you're going to focus on first in treatment, okay? Repetitive behaviors, one that I didn't mention is moving your body, right? You might flap your hands, or you might like to spin, or you might like to kind of pace around. And that can be an obstacle, but sometimes it just means, hey, I'm happy, right? I like to do a happy dance when I get what I want, right? That's not a problem, right? You don't say, oh, we don't need that. We don't want to see that, even though it's different, right? If that's how they are expressing their emotions, then we give them the words. Oh, you seem so happy right now. You must be happy because, right? And that allows them to hear the words, make those connections to what happy means to this feeling I'm having right now, okay? So I want you to, that point is really important, because a lot of times people think of all of these characteristics of autism as negative, whereas some are challenges, but others are just, this is who they are, and this is what they are. And when we think about acceptance of people who are different, this is one of the things we're talking about, okay? This last one here, it refers to sensory. Does everybody understand what sensory processing mean? Is this a term that you have heard? Anyone not know it? Okay, so thank you for raising your hand. So our sensory world, right? We're always taking in information, right? We're always hearing things. We're always seeing things, right? I know where I am in my space here, right? I've got skin, right? That is touch, right? My balance is another one. So these are all senses that we who don't have sensory issues can manage very well, right? I can take all of this information in at once, and even though there's some kids running around and kind of being a little loud on the other side of the wall here, I can filter that out. That's not bothering me. It's not messing up how I'm communicating too much. But kids with autism, people with autism, they might say, I can't concentrate because there's this background noise, right? Or I've got a tag on my shirt that is driving me crazy, right? And all I want to do is rip it out, right? Or all I want to do is take the shirt off, right? Maybe I don't like to wear shoes, and I like to walk around with bare feet everywhere, right? Even when it's cold outside. Things like a fire alarm, an unexpected fire alarm, they're covering their ears, right? Because that is too loud, or a vacuum, or something in the house that's too loud, right? So there's a lot of these, people can be hypersensitive, right? So that's the loud noises and covering your ears or moving away. Or they might be hyposensitive, where they're sensory seeking, right? Oh, I love how this feels, right? Oh, I love the feeling of hair, and I'm going to touch my, mom's hair all the time. And I'll even go up to other women and touch their hair, sometimes. So those are the things. And when you say like, oh, that's not right, but the purpose is that I like to touch hair, and I'm just going to try to do it. And they don't get the social part of, hey, that's not appropriate, right? So these sensory differences are something that is very, very common in kids with autism, and can be a huge obstacle, right? I know kids who are so sensory seeking that they spin and spin and spin and spin all day, right? And this is what they like to do, and it's like trying to calm them down and slow them down so that they can learn is a real challenge, right? So we need to come up with strategies that are going to be used for that, okay? So as I've gone through those 7 symptoms of what autism is, right, you see in the middle there that we need to see both. We need to see the deficits or absence of some of these social communication skills, right, and development, and then the presence of, this is something that's extra, this is unique in disabilities, is that it's the presence of something, the presence of repetitive behavior, the presence of rigidity, the presence of these sensory differences. That is what makes, that is a big part of what autism is, okay? So we'll go on to the next one here. I'm gonna drink a little water. So move on to the next one. And then we think about autism as a spectrum, and this is also very important, and this is when we talk about, we're also talking a little bit about intellectual disabilities. So these, if you think about this spectrum, right, from lower skills to higher skills, right, or or more impairment and less impairment, okay? So if you think about one child with autism, and there's a saying, if you haven't heard it yet, you will hear it about 1,000,000 times, right? That if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism, right? It speaks to the variability that is present, right? That's why you very rarely see two people with autism who are exactly the same. They love the same things, they exhibit the same behaviors, they have the same strengths and weaknesses, right? So if you look at these red lines on this, and we'll see if this works, Sini, because there's supposed to be a little action on this, but yeah, there we go. So, so the first one was a child who had kind of less, kind of more skills in their social communication. Maybe they're verbal, maybe they can communicate in sentences, but maybe we're only seeing them communicate for their needs, right? I want this, I'm gonna take this. Or things that they don't want, right? But more rarely are you seeing them say, like hold things up and say, hey, look at that, look how cool that is, right? Or look at this, I just finished this puzzle, or I just finished this book, or look at this artwork that I did, or look at that great blue heron that's flying through the sky, right? They may do less of that and more of those communication for the needs that they have, that their own personal needs, okay? And then the other child, I don't know if you can go back. We'll go back to the other one. So there, thank you. So, but they might have more rigidity. This profile of this person might have more restrictive interest, more rigidity. Maybe they have more challenging behaviors and have a hard time with routines, and they have a hard time transitioning, right? Getting used to new things. So this, so you might say, oh, what are we going to do for this particular kid? And we'd say, well, we probably ought to work on their ability to be flexible, right? To be able to do things that are asked of them, right? If we're going to send them to school, then they got to kind of get with the program and be able to follow the instructions at school and follow the schedule. And there are strategies, and there are really good interventions and strategies that help kids with autism, right? And this is a good example of, this is where we might start with a good school program. We might think about something like ABA or speech or OT, as if this was a younger kid. If they were older, we might think about talk therapy or something else, okay, if they had the skills to be able to do that, right? So let's go to the next profile. And this is a kid who has much more significant communication issues, right? So we might be really thinking, speech therapy would be really a big focus for this particular kid, because the obstacle is his communication or her communication. Whereas she might be on the more flexible side, right? So you may not be thinking ABA as the first idea for this kid, but they might say, let's just get him into some social groups. Maybe we can get him into opportunities to interact with other kids, and some speech therapy to really focus on the language and the communication, okay? So we could put these red lines everywhere along the spectrum, right? And sometimes we have kids who are pretty impacted, pretty significantly delayed, right? And those are kids that we look at what's their intellectual abilities like, right? And that is where, 5, 6, 7 years of age, we might be able to do some testing for them through the schools, and we'll be able to identify, all right, well, what is the potential of this child in terms of how they learn, right? And understanding that intellectual ability is really important. I will say, okay, you can have a child who is non-speaking, non-verbal, right? And they can be very intelligent, right? And these are the hardest kids to be able to help in some ways, because it's like, how do we teach them to be able to communicate? And even though they have this brilliant mind inside, they're trapped. Autism is really trapping them, and every single one of these profiles would result in a different type of treatment approach for those kids. And we have some really good treatments, as I said, I'm going to talk about, but we want to think about what are those obstacles to prioritize what you're going to do. Okay? So, Sina, we'll go to the next one. Okay. So, these I like this. These are quotes that come from the book that I'm going to kind of show here in a second. When we're at the Autism Center at Seattle Children's or at the University of Washington, we use a book called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. So you probably have to like memorize that, right, Razak? Yeah. So as a psychiatrist, so that's basically his job. He's going to follow this book, you know. But this is right out of the book. This I took right out of the DSM. And this point where it says symptoms must be present in the early developmental period, but may not become apparent until social demands exceed their limited capacity. Okay? So what I'm gonna interpret that a little bit, because psychiatrists love to like use very flowery language that is hard for the rest of us to understand. So what it means is that everyone has a certain ability, right, to be social, and and as kids get older, other kids are also learning, right? So children with autism, they could be they might want to be very social, right? And they may hang with the other kids as long as the game is chase, right? Everyone's chasing each other in first grade. Everybody's, being able to, the way the play is happening is predictable, right? And they, and there may be some subtle symptoms of autism that are there, but maybe we didn't pick up on them, right? Maybe we didn't recognize what they were at this early age, because this child was talking and seemed bright in different ways, right? But at some point, maybe it's second grade or third grade or fourth grade, right, this gap starts to happen where the other kids are learning and becoming sophisticated socially very quickly, whereas the child with autism is kind of falling behind, right? Because all of a sudden, instead of running and chasing, now there are more sophisticated games, and there are more rules that need to be followed. And conversations among the kids, between the kids, becomes much more of what is happening. Forget about middle school, when they're transitioning to middle school, and all of a sudden they're not playing anymore at all, and it's all just, oh, did you hear what so-and-so did? Did you hear what so-and-so did? You see that? What happened? That teacher, I hate that teacher. Like those are all things that happen. I have teenagers, so those are quotes from my kids. So symptoms, so that's one of the reasons we don't pick up until kids are a little bit later, right? And people are always worried, how do we miss this? What happened? But it's very common, right? Especially in kids who have average to above average intelligence and language skills that are at least, functional, okay? This other part is also very important, and symptoms must be masked. Symptoms may be masked by learned strategies later in life, and the autistic community, my friends who have autism, hate this word masking, right? I think that they prefer, and I kept it in here because that's what the book says, but I think a better word is compensated, right? Symptoms may be compensated for by learned strategies. So this speaks to the capacity for learning that is present in every child with autism, right? But and those are the goals, right? The goals of intervention is to teach skills, right? Teach skills that allow them to compensate for the things that are hard for them so that they can reach whatever potential that they are supposed to reach, right? This is true for each and every one of us, right? We all have our strengths and weaknesses. We all have things that are hard for us, right? If I didn't have my checklist, the things that I write down every day, this is a strategy. If I tried to remember all the things that I'm supposed to do in a day, right, I wouldn't remember them. I'd forget them. My wife would be killing me, because you're like, you didn't do this, I didn't do this, And I have a strategy that is effective for me, right? When we're thinking about the skills that kids with autism lack, we are thinking about how do we teach them the skills that are going to allow them to compensate and reach their potential in life, okay? As I said earlier, autism is a disability, so for us to feel confident in the diagnosis, that symptoms should be causing an impairment in some area, right? There are a lot more people today. Autism has become almost a kind of a fun buzz thing to have. If you know any kids who are on TikTok, there's a lot of people who are self-identifying as autistic on TikTok, and And I think that is it's a bit of a problem because the people who do have autism and it is an impairment, it is a disability, it kind of weakens that, I think, a little bit. So it's something that is a new thing. There's a lot of different, lots of different changes, and people with autism are autistic people, depending on, you can really use both. That's what I've learned from my autistic friends is, it can be it can be who you are. It can be your identity, right? And a lot of groups and a lot of young adults groups are saying, "Oh, I found my tribe. I found my group when I met other people who were kind of like me." So there's something really wonderful and inclusive around finding other people who get you and are similar to you. Okay, and it can be a disability, right? And autism can be a very significant disability for some, So this spectrum is very important to recognize in terms of what the potential is in terms of where your child's going to kind of get to, okay? These last kind of things here, this diagram here is just sort of when people used to think about the spectrum was less autistic to more autistic, but then what it can really look like is all of these different things. And this is a small slide. I don't know if we're going to share these with people who want them, but there's anxiety or social difficulties or noise sensitivities, fixations, aggression, tics and fidgets, eye contact, posture, and there's different degrees of all of those. And this is a sort of more current understanding if we were to put it in a visual model of what we think about as terms of autism. There's severity, and when you're getting a diagnosis, we say, does this child also have language impairment? So you say with or without language impairment, and with or without intellectual disabilities, right? So that's when we're making the diagnosis, those things are included, and that is helpful for those who come and see them after, a neurologist or psychiatrist, for example, to be able to say, all right, I get a sense of what type of child, their strengths and weaknesses, just from hearing, some of those things. And then there's these levels of supports. I hesitate to put these on here because these were just kind of created and they're very subjective. But when you think about a level 1 person with autism, these are all more on the mild end, and that they require some support. A mild case of autism is still autism, and they still need support in certain areas, and finding what areas of support is really the key for that. A 2 is kind of right in the middle, right, where you have some good strengths, some weaknesses, and we're able to figure out how do you use those strengths to be able to compensate for those things that are hard. And then level 3s are the children or people who really require substantial support, right? These are the people who might need an aid. They might struggle to live independently. They may eventually have a lot of significant disruptive behaviors or really have a hard time learning to communicate. And so that's this level 3. And I'm not going to go too far into those levels because I don't really like them, but it is a way that it is used to characterize. And I think one of the things that it is being used for in our state is to determine access to some services like through DDA, which is the Developmental Disability Administration. So any questions about this idea of the spectrum or comments, from those who are here on the panel or anybody? Yes, please. Because I just think it's a great question, and it's just my opinion, but I think it's being used to deny services, and so it makes people like doctors making the diagnosis say, well, if I give them a level 1, then they're not going to end up getting the services that they want. So there's always this give and take between the insurance companies and those who are approving services, and then the people who are trying to get kids into services, and this has caused more problems than it's helped over the years. So it's and I think parents end up kind of getting stuck on, oh, my kid's a level 2, right? Where what you really ought to be, and what, in my opinion, is again looking at what are your strengths, what are they good at, and then what are those obstacles to learning, because that really helps you identify oh, well, we ought to be looking at and really strengthening their communication. Or maybe we need to be strengthening their motivation around doing things that are not preferred, right? I saw a hand up. Go ahead. Yeah. Yeah. Right. And that. Yeah. Yeah. You know, and navigating the schools, and I think you're a teacher, right? Go ahead. Why don't you answer that question? And it really depends on the school. I will say it just depends on the school.
I just point about this as well. So the problem with mental illness as general and psychiatry as general is it's the subjectivity of it. Sadly, we don't have kind of like labs or images that can help us kind of like determine most of these stuff. It's kind of like there is a joke about you go to 10 psychiatrists and come with 13 diagnoses. So it is very subjective field. And that talks to your conversation about kind of like, does the level of support matter, doesn't matter? It's kind of like, it's really very subjective. But the point is kind of like for these diagnoses, like what Jim was calling like the DSM-5, it's closer to a recipe book. It's kind of like, it have like just like observations about the things kind of like that across a lot of people and experts have seen. And just like people try to do kind of like, and put people based on that subjectivity. That being said, that's actually a disguise curse, which kind of like you can advocate more for your kid. If you don't believe that, you should have a second opinion. You should advocate more for your kid because these stuff are quite subjective as well.
Hi, I worked in the school system for 16 years, and they do depend. When they develop the kids' IEPs, they develop them depending on the doctor's diagnosis, and if they require full supports, that's when they get an aid all day. But to determine if a kid is in general ed, it depends on the level of disruption and the level of how he fits in terms of if he's good in math, yes, he joins the class during math, but he struggles in LA, then he will be in a different room. But these are definitely used in the school system in Lake Washington to determine the IEPs. I worked 16 years.
Yes, please.
Compensation for like the skills, and you mentioned also ABA, right? And like at least in my experience or what I've seen, like the ABA do is they try mostly like when you're talking about masking, they're maybe trying to mask some of the autistic traits in a way, not really. At least in my experience, I don't. There may be like different kinds of ABAs and stuff like that.
And so did everybody hear the comment about masking and what sometimes what the ABA providers are aiming to do, right? I would say, and this is just my opinion, and maybe we need to have a discussion and have people from the schools, from different places come in and talk. The systems, you know, whether it's the insurance system, the educational system, the medical system, right? there's a lot of variability, and there's a lot of different ways and different approaches of how the services are provided, right? So, there are wonderful people in the schools doing great work, and then there are some schools that are not, right? And they take advantage of the people who don't know, okay? There are some great schools that don't do that, okay? And this is why we heard the word advocate, right? If you're informed, if you have knowledge about how the system works, recognizing that especially in the United States, these systems are racist. They're prejudiced against people who are different, right? So it could be the Muslim community, it could be black people, it could be Asian people, and it's people who lack education in rural places, right? These groups are subject to being underserved by ABA programs, by insurance companies, by school districts, because they don't have the power, they don't have the advocacy skills, and that is why we're here, I think, is to be able to inform and help people understand how to advocate in a system that is against them a lot of the time. So, we could kind of debate using these levels of support, right? How do you get your kid into the right services at the right time is a challenge. And I think that is one of the things that we want to kind of talk about here and reiterate, and maybe we'll kind of move forward here a little bit, because I don't want to dominate, and I want to make sure we get everyone else to hear. So let me go over to the next one, Stini. So, we're going to talk a little bit about different treatments, and I'm happy to kind of talk more about ABA, because ABA is a hot topic. I want to just make sure that there's so many great strengths in autism, right? And I think that is one of the things that I love about working with people with autism is their uniqueness. It is their ability to, they're just strong, tenacious, resilient people, right? And they have a lot, and they have a lot up against them, right? So I have a lot of respect. I have a lot of really admiration for people with autism, and I've learned so much from people with autism in terms of how I view the world and in terms of how I view what is kind of socially appropriate and that sort of thing. So let's move on to the next one. So I'm going to go through this really quickly. We know that autism has similar rates across cultures, and boys are more likely to be impacted, but we do know that girls present differently. So if you have a girl with autism, and all of the tests and everything that have been designed, especially the DSM-5, wasn't normed on girls. They weren't looking at girls with autism when they made these judgments. So we're doing a better job. There's a lot of research going on how autism presents in girls, and chances are it's more than 1 in 4. It's probably more, close to, girls probably have a higher prevalence rate than is being identified. All right, next one. So let's get rid of this. I hope this one, we're going to get rid of that. We're going to skip that one. And here's the DSM-5 here. So, how do we make this decision? There is no test. You can't take a picture of the brain. You can't get some blood and say, oh, this is why, this is autism, right? And, if someone tells you, oh, you should go and get a genetic test, right? That's not going to tell you if your kid has autism either. And these are, and this is one of these things, like there's groups in Arizona that claim this now, right? So this is where you got to be careful, especially if you're a parent and saying and being like, oh, well, I heard that this is there's a magic pill. There's a magic thing that's going to help my child. Lots of times people are just trying to make some money. Okay, so you want to be really careful about that. So we use this. Here's the picture of the book that we use. Let's go to the next one. So, and we'll go quickly through some of this. When you think about what you're going to do, so you've gotten the diagnosis of autism, prior to prioritizing, figuring out what you're going to do. And the school is where most people start. And this is where all you're getting is your support. So really building a foundation through school. I think it would be a good thing, Rima, to kind of talk about the IEP process and things like that at a future date, because I think it's really, really important to understand that system in order to be able to advocate within it. So after you've said, all right, I've got a pretty good school program set up, then we want you to think about therapies that have evidence behind them, you know. So therapies that we know work, right? And there's a heck of a lot of complementary and alternative treatments up there that may or may not work, right? So we want you to start with these things like speech therapy. There we go. Okay. And I'll talk, and there is a list of other therapies out here. And then you're going to hear about complementary alternative treatments, different diets, right? Taking vitamins, you know, and there's a whole other, you know, there's a lot of even more alternative type treatments. You know, this is for you to decide, right? Is it worth the investment to be able to follow some of these things? You have a child who loves art, right? Art therapy is not an evidence-based therapy for autism, but if your child loves art or music, do some art, get some music therapy, you know, involved. So this is why I talk about it being individual based on the strengths of the child, the interests of the child, and, you know, what are those areas that are obstacles. All right, what's next? So, so one thing that is really, really important to recognize is that schools and birth to 3 centers do not need a diagnosis of autism to initiate services, right? This is something that is communicated sometimes by schools, because I've heard it multiple times. And it's not how it's supposed to happen, right? You're supposed to refer to the school because you're to get an evaluation, to take a look at, is this child eligible for services, right? The diagnosis is not important. What is important is doing an evaluation of the areas of need and determining whether the child qualifies as eligible, okay? So familiarize yourself with the local school districts and how to access those services if you're beginning them, okay? And there is some more information here. Sina, let's go to the next one. This is a really great support. So the Washington State Governor Office of the Education Ombuds, you'll see this in the resources later. This is a packet that is really, really helpful to be able to just share your diagnosis with the school and let them know, because there may be some things that they are eligible for. There may be some things that they want to evaluate now that they said, oh, now we have this diagnosis, okay? So that's a really good guide for people. And as you see, it's available in Spanish and Somali. We'll do the next one here. And these are really the most recommended evidence-based therapies when we think about it, right? Speech and OT and physical therapy, social skills groups, those are all things that you can access through the schools, right? And you can get them out in the community if you felt like, hey, this is the obstacle that we should be looking at. Parent training, very important to kind of just learn the skills that the therapists are using so that you can actually support those same skills at home, those same learning. ABA therapy, again, is a therapeutic approach that uses behaviorism there's good uses of ABA, and then there are times where ABA is not really the most effective. And I think your comment earlier is, you know, how do you make a judgment whether the ABA therapist is doing the best for your child? And that's where it's really important to kind of say, hey, they're just trying to mask these things, instead of, you know, a therapist should say, I'm going to bring what's best out in my child, and that is really what, and engage with them and interact with them and say, we're going to get to help this child reach their potential, okay, wherever that may be. As they get older, you might see therapy or counseling, and medications, again, or something that maybe Raza can talk more about, can be effective, but there's no medication for autism. There are medications for some of some anxiety or ADHD-like symptoms that might go along with autism, but there's not a medication that's going to help with symptoms of autism. Okay, next. Here are some resources that we'll move here, and then I think at the end here is I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the programs. Is there something else? So, okay, we're just going to talk. So we talked about this include collaborative, and one of the things that we do here, why don't we just move on to the next one, Sini, we have these programs called ECHO. So ECHO programs are designed to teach doctors and other licensed mental health counselors across the state about diagnosing and providing care for autism. So it's a great, so if you have and this is for you to go and bring to your doctors, right? Bring to your therapist. There is this really cool program at the University of Washington that you can join for free, and you can actually earn continuing medical education credits for participating, because what we really need is more pediatricians and more primary care providers out in each communities, especially in kind of specific cultural communities, to be part of this and be part of our community and really just learn about best practices. All right, this is just a map. So we have crossed the state with these ECHO programs, and we'll just go to the last one here. And then there's another organization. So if you're a parent who is like, this is what I feel drawn to do this work, right? I want to be an advocate for other parents with autism. If you have autism and you say, I want to be an advocate for other people with autism, this is a really wonderful program through the University of Washington. It's called the Leadership Education and Neurodevelopmental Disabilities. You can go and be a trainee as a family member or as an autistic advocate. And it's a great opportunity to kind of learn in an interdisciplinary way from other people to be able to become that advocate, become that strong advocate, and especially in kind of specific communities. Okay, I think that is it for me. Okay, so there was their contacts, and I think everything goes to Gary. So any questions, just send them to Gary Stovey. So I think what we'll do is move on to, is it Razak who's next?
I can just talk about 2 points related to this. So just kind of to complement this, there is 2 points I want to emphasize on, is that you don't have to have all the symptoms to have the diagnosis. So, for example, we've seen kind of the list of symptoms, kind of the 2 domain, kind of the behaviors and the social aspects. You don't have to have all the items within the circles to have the diagnosis. So this is kind of up to the psychiatrist or the psychologist to see how much do you have and how much deficit you have, and can discuss if you have the diagnosis or not. The second point, the point about medication. So just to emphasize this, there is no medication for autism. The medication we're talking about is with things that comes with autism, like an anxiety. People on the spectrum are more prone to anxiety. They are more prone to kind of other kind of kinds of psychiatric diagnoses. And these stuff have medication, but autism in itself doesn't have medication for it. And I'll also kind of emphasize about the diagnostic. So the diagnostic is done through an interview with the psychiatrist, and kind of it's different from a place to place where autism is diagnosed, but there is no imaging, because there is no imaging for most of psychiatric disorders. So just if someone tells you that they have an image for that, you have to be suspicious about that. People are using this. We have seen it not mainly in autism, but in different diagnoses that say that they can diagnose it via brain MRI or something. So that's kind of these are the 3 points related to Jim's. Any questions about these before we move on? Yep. Sorry, can you repeat that? I'm not sure about here, Jim, kind of yeah.
The question is, Assalamu alaikum, everyone. So the question was, who can diagnose autism?
Okay, so it's a great question, and people who can automatically do it are psychiatrists, neurologists, and developmental pediatricians and psychologists. So there is also a system in Washington State called the Center of Excellence system. And if they go through it, so pediatricians, nurse practitioners, naturopathic doctors, they can all take this training, which Thea and I are actually part of, and then they can be eligible to officially make the diagnosis. This is through the healthcare authority only, right? So if you have private insurance, then the private insurance may have different rules. So for example, we've heard recently, and this is again, this push and pull between providing services and denying services. So there's a local insurance called Regents, and Regents will say, oh, well, we're not even taking any diagnosis unless it's a psychologist, right? And then you have to kind of push, the medical system has to push back against that with Regents, So there's always this changing thing. Speech-language pathologists and OTs cannot formally make the diagnosis, but they can participate in the evaluation. Yeah. Psychologists is what this particular, that's the new thing that we're hearing that has to be coming from a psychologist. So psychiatrists, and it just really varies on the insurance. But if you're, the group, the healthcare authority, which manages all the MCOs in the state, and and Medicaid, they will, if you go through this training, they will acknowledge, all right, the diagnosis made by a nurse practitioner, a pediatrician, family doctor, or a naturopath.
Can I ask clarification on
Yes.
this particular point? So it sounds to me like what I'm hearing.
Here.
You want me to stand up? Sorry about that. I just want clarification for myself. So it sounds like what I'm hearing you say is that this is the healthcare authority, and there's some changes on the credentials someone can have to diagnose autism. So that could be changing, and it also is dependent on each insurance provider on what they'll accept, keyword accept, for the diagnosis. And that is a key thing. Anybody who's seeking a diagnosis specifically, make sure they are credentialed to make that diagnosis and that it is accepted by your insurance. I know that's more work. It is essential. Just saying. Thank you. Oh, okay. Okay, thank you.
Yes, and that's exactly kind of like related to the topic I'll be talking about. So first of all, my name is Ahmed. I am a psychiatry resident in University of Washington, second year now, finishing second year. I moved from Egypt 3 years ago. So I born, raised, graduated, and worked for 3 years in Egypt. So I have the privilege of working kind of like in 2 different cultures and 2 different medical systems. And that's kind of like how I got involved with autism because of Jim Mancini. He's the one that sponsored me from Egypt to come here, and he allowed to come to the Autism Center where I was introduced to kind of like Seattle Children's Autism Center, the diagnostic interview there. I observed that as well. So it was quite an interesting experience. So while I worked in Egypt for 3 years and worked kind of like in a very, the healthcare system in Egypt is kind of like, especially for mental illness, is designed differently. We have like huge hospitals in central areas that serves areas of Egypt psychiatrically. And interestingly enough, during my 3 years of working in Egypt, I made 0 diagnoses of autism. And when you think about it, like when I came here, and I was kind of like interesting that you can see a lot of people kind of like coming to get these diagnoses, and kind of like there is like a high prevalence of diagnoses. And you can't help but think about it. Is it us Egyptians are more resilient? Which is kind of like not true. It just kind of like makes you wonder, why is that the situation? And the more you think about it, it's kind of like we don't live in a vacuum. We live in a community, we live in a society, and some actions make sense and some actions doesn't make sense. So for an Egyptian to get the diagnosis, he will only get the stigma, because sadly we don't have any services. It doesn't make any sense for me to give him a diagnosis. especially kind of like in Egypt, there is this term about disabilities generally, intellectual disabilities generally, and autism specifically, and they are called children of God. So I think most Egyptians prefer that to autistic, and it makes sense. It's just like culturally more accepted, culturally more appropriate, and a diagnosis doesn't come with services. Unlike here, which I was surprised that like the amount of services and intervention that some people might have, it just, you have to access them. It might be a hassle, but it is worth it. And then comes kind of like my surprise that during my year in Seattle Children's, I think I have seen relatively fewer Middle Eastern and relatively fewer kind of like Muslims who coming for this, and it's, you can't help but wonder what is going on. And I'm quite biased. I'm very, very what we call psychoanalytically kind of less structured, so I kind of like try to figure out why people behave in this way, and kind of like, and cultural psychiatry is a big thing for me as well. And it comes to remnants of our immigration. You have to all think about that kind of like, for people who are immigrants or first generations, they come from their countries of origin, they come to this new country, from maybe third world country to a first world country, but that experience is not it's not, at least for me as well, it's not a light experience. It's a huge traumatic experience, and it comes with a lot of some people say trauma, but like I don't like the term trauma, so just like it comes with a lot of psychological challenges. And this goes to kind of like what Jim started his conversation. It is very natural for an immigrant or a son of immigrants to be a bit wary about the system, to be wary about the diagnosis, because that is kind of like, it's part of the experience. But we also don't have to be kind of like either so left or so right. It's kind of like sometimes these unconscious processes and kind of like the shame that's remnant from our cultures about like some diagnoses, some intellectual disabilities, some differences. Sometimes it just like unconsciously drives us to avoid the diagnosis. You know, if you are in Egypt, I would say, okay, fine, I don't care. But the problem is, it's a different situation. It's a different structure here. You cannot apply the rules of Egypt to the States because you have services, and your child, if you have a child with autism, would benefit from these services. His life will be different. So that's why you have to be conscious about kind of like, oh, no, my kid is fine. Yeah, but like if you have even the tiniest suspicion, you should catch to that thread and follow with that, because that will make huge difference. Yes, it wouldn't make him as kind of like a neurotypical kid, but like, what is neurotypical? It's just like, it's kind of like a vague term. We are all different. We all have differences, like deficiencies, like we have our like shortcomings, and everyone works around stuff in a different way. So if people on the spectrum need an extra support, they deserve that extra support. And it's kind of like, for you as a parent, just be wary about your unconscious guilt, your unconscious shame, your unconscious fear, and just kind of like the unconscious things that might be kind of like making you more resistant to having the diagnosis, because the diagnosis comes with services. I think the last topic as well I wanted to talk about is about kind of like the support. I kind of like, it's related to immigration as well. You lose a lot of support, and people in our communities, kind of like back in Egypt, have way more support than they can have. Yes, you have services, but as the well kind of like in Egypt, you have this kind of like where an autistic kid is known for the whole neighborhood. He can walk around safely. Everyone knows him, like the awful neighbor before the kind neighbor. They know he's a child of a God. So it's just like no one. So like, so families get that support, that even social support, without even the services. So you have the services here, but like as well, kind of like it's also very important to remind ourselves as a Muslim, we are a tribe. We are here to support each other, and we have to kind of like not lose that identity. Sometimes when you move from place to place, you just lose part of your identity. Totally normal, but it needs some work because it's kind of, yeah, they have support, but like the support is more pragmatic, more practical, but they also need that social support that comes within a community, within kind of like brothers and sisters, and just like feeling of acceptance. Because someone with that diagnosis as well, mind that he also have these unconscious processes that make him feels shameful or kind of like whatever, these kind of stuff. And he needs that more than anyone from his brothers and sisters to be kind of like supportive and accepting. Yes. Yeah, and I appreciate you sharing that, and that's exactly what I'm talking about that we have to be careful about like how much are we avoiding these diagnoses. Because it is natural. I can totally understand, like if my kid gets sick, like I would initially be like hesitant about doing anything about it, but it's just like, as I was mentioning, kind of like avoiding, the question is like, why are you avoiding that diagnosis? If you have suspicion, if you notice something about your kid and think, oh, this kids look different, why are you avoiding that? And that's what I'm thinking about, or like, that's the thing about like, these are remnants from past culture or like a different context where that avoidance made sense and was okay, which you can't apply it here because as you said, like there is services, and that's what we're trying to do here, just like to educate people about we have things to do. It's kind of like there is services, there is a change that can mean, and there is progress. Thank you.
A lot of parents don't want to accept that, and they think that that is a lack of inclusion, and it's actually, this is one of my peer tutors. So, so this is an example of that self-contained classroom actually is a place where they actually get more services, more social actions, more inclusion than what I think a lot of parents think. And they think that that self-contained is a denial of that general education, and it's absolutely not. I can tell you, and he can tell you as well, my students work on a lot more in my class than if they went to a gen ed class. So I think that's where the misconception is a lot of times, is that we think, oh, I don't want those services, I want these services, but when the more, and not knowing the extent of what those services really are. So statistically, that's not true. They don't mimic each other. That's not. Mhm. Yeah.
It's about more education and more acceptance. And back to the point of the acceptance, because the acceptance kind of like for a parent to accept that his child is in a special ed class, it's a big thing. It's a big thing. And I would just like to emphasize that acceptance starts from the community. So for him, it's just like, it's kind of like, it's always that kind of like, it's a shock when you have a diagnosis. It's a shock when you see like your needs extra support. And you go to your friend and you kind of like, yeah, my kid will need like an educational, like if your friend, if your community is supportive, the sense of shame and guilt would be, seems people are accepting that normally. And that's what we call in psychiatry a corrective experience. People go to a therapist and pay money because they need that acceptance. And kind of like in community like us, it's just like kind of like acceptance is a major thing in our religion. So kind of like even in that, just like, yes, it's normal to be feeling shameful at the first, or kind of like feeling kind of like shocked by it. But the more you see acceptance from your community and your close people, the more that just like feeling will change into, oh, things are just normal. It's different, but is within the normal spectrum. I agree with you to a certain extent. I think kind of like our prone to shame and guilt is more, but at the same time, it's just like this news is shocking for everything. What is different is just like back to kind of like that level of acceptance between communities. So we need to pick up that.
I have a hand right up here. I'm going to work my way back here, and then I'll come back to you, okay?
I'm going to try to be quick. I'm an ABA therapist and an RBT. I've been doing it for 20 years. To answer your question, in order to know if ABA is successful, your kid needs to generalize it in the community, not just on the table where he works with his therapist. If he doesn't generalize it, that means it's not successful. The other thing I'd like to say, I started a center for autism in Jordan. It's been very, very successful. I worked with Dr. Stacy Shook. Some of you might know her. We established a center, and the families were in denial at first, but you educate them and train them, and they come around and they see the success of the programs, and it becomes the norms there. I'm in the process of starting another center in Palestine. It's gonna be an NGO. It's a free service for people. We are trying to educate people, train them, and it's as important to train the families, because as the brother here said, there's so much denial. You'll be surprised there's even so much denial here. The minorities more than the American families, that's the truth. Maybe because they don't want to admit it, maybe because the community doesn't accept it, they compare their kids to others. But the more they see success in what you're doing, they come around and they come to you and they do get the services, and everyone is happy at the end.
MashaAllah, sister. As I work my way back, I would like people to take note cards and leave your contact information so that we can get in touch with you, or if you have any other questions, or if you would like us to talk about something specific, because again, this is just the planting of a seed, and we would like it to grow, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum. Hello. So what I've experienced a lot of time is that people are afraid of misdiagnosis. There are a lot of people who would take advantage of children's, a few of their weaknesses, and they use that against them. I personally have experienced that with my son. He's probably, from what I've seen on the screen, has a few of those things, but was taken greatly advantage of in school. Like, you know, they would remove him from a classroom saying that he needed more attention, but then I found out that they had him watching Minecraft in a different room. I don't see how that was helping him. And because my son, he's 9 years old and he's very wise beyond his years, you know, he would always love to take those time outs and those breaks that they were giving him. So he started purposely doing things. And I felt like it was really preventing him from learning, to the point that they said that he was falling behind, and that, you know, his math and his reading and everything was falling behind. But, you know, we found that he was more advanced in the class, you know, with everything. And so even when he was tested from, you know, his doctor, you know, they were saying, okay, he has some of these things, but not all of this. So a lot of times people would take advantage of that. And my question is, how do you prevent that from happening? You know, how do you prevent your child from being a victim of someone just trying to get a service? Or, you know, I know that sometimes the school gets financial backings and stuff like that as well. And someone very close and dear to me experienced something very similar too, where they tried to take her child away, have her child removed from the home, because she didn't want to do experimental drugs because her child suffered with extreme, you know, ADHD and autism. So how do you not, you know, fall victim to some of that?
We have another question. Sister, did you have a question?
Assalamu alaikum. So I don't think it's a question, but I feel like autism is like more like a stigma to a lot of societies. I don't know if it's lack of awareness or people just aren't accepting enough of a disease. Like, I'm from Pakistan, and you're either completely mental or you're normal. Like, there's no in between. And a lot of special needs kind of falls in the middle. So I think it's just not that like a parent doesn't want to help their child. They are accepting like of the disease. It's just that we're too afraid of what someone else might think of our child. Or, I mean, a lot of people know about autism, but see, you have a child who's running around like crazy and the other children are not. People kind of stare down at them. And like a lot of what the sister here said about inclusion, it's just knowing about autism and then kind of thinking you're okay with it and then showing that you're okay with it. There's like two different things. So I think it's not that a parent doesn't want to accept that their child has a problem. It's just a lot of cultures, they're just not accepting enough, or there's a lack of education or awareness. So I think a lot of it has to do with that as well.
So which one of you would like to speak to this? Okay, one more question.
So I'm also from Egypt. So I'm curious if you can tell us, if you have time later, if you can tell us more about growing without services for autistic people, and what challenges do they have, and as adults, you know, what kind of like they lack, and you know, challenge. Because you mentioned that the community might get more support, right? But I find it hard to believe that the support that they would get from the community would be helpful in whatever shortcomings they have, right?
Okay, who on the panel would like to speak to that?
Hi, yes, sister. So I wanted to speak about to the point of how do you advocate for services or things for your child or anyone you see in the community. There is a lot of resources out there, but you don't know what you don't know. If you don't know the questions to ask, who to go to, what you can ask, how you can ask, where you can go, it gets very limiting very fast. And I understand that sense of isolation can feel suffocating, really, when you're trying to get answers and help and solutions and resources. And then it becomes more prevalent once you share that information, if you do, with your community, wherever that is, school, home, work, someone at the grocery store, okay? I can't tell you how many times I've been stopped at the grocery store with my son saying one thing on his talker, and I've had total strangers come to me and ask me, how did I get that? Where did I get it? How do I do it? What do I do with it? So this is opportunities, is how I see it. I know in other cultures, it may not be viewed that way. It could be part of the stigma or part of the labeling or kind of being different. But I know in those situations that you mentioned specifically, there is advocacy that can be done and that needs to be done. Because a parent is part of a team for their child, and they need to be very much a part of the process in learning about ways and resources for their child or for their community members, and also participating. So learning, understanding their rights and whatnot, and how to advocate and what to get and what questions to get answered, but then also that support system around them, and that's just communication. And I think we need to do a whole panel, maybe, even discussion on what is inclusion. It's a buzzword in the school districts right now, I will say that. And it's a lot of school districts are saying we need to come up with a mission statement on what is inclusion and a model and even a whole pie chart on what is inclusion. What does that all really mean? And I think it's important to understand what the word inclusion means by definition, but also what does that mean in multiple settings? And I appreciate what you said, which is throughout that person's world, right? School, work, home, the bus, I don't care where it is, they need to feel included. They also need to know how to advocate for themselves. There's a lot to do. It's overwhelming. I'm Adriana Mohammed, by the way. I was supposed to have a little 5 minutes here, but I wanted to express that this is something we can talk about after. There is some resources if you're interested. I definitely know of some advocacy groups locally, even here on the east side, that would be happy to participate in helping with that if you need it.
I'll be short about kind of like the point you mentioned about the acceptance, and it's just like I will re-emphasize about kind of like the more you talk about it and the more you normalize it, the easier for people to accept it. It's just like it's a process. Like it's kind of like if it's something kind of like it's very understandable that it's like we are in the start of this process, and that's why we're doing this. Even like in Western cultures and like in people who now seem kind of like more inclusive and more acceptance, it didn't start this way. And I just like would add, like my point here is that I add the layer of we come from a different culture and there is remnants to that culture, and we have to be careful about that, because when you look at something and you have like this feeling of shame, oh my God, my kid is on the spectrum, where does that come from? It comes from like your upbringing, your kind of like your cultural structure. It's totally, I'm not saying this is bad or good, it's just different. But the thing I would emphasize about that, in certain culture, that is okay. Like what I was talking about kind of like Egypt, it is okay because it really doesn't matter. The kid is not losing anything. There is nothing we can do about it. But in here, if you follow that shameful feeling, you're avoiding some resources. You're I don't know the term in English, denying your kid some resources. About kind of like the challenges in Egypt, when I say kind of like you have more community support in Egypt, what I meant is emotional support. But kind of like practical support, like most of these kids end up not reading, most of these kids don't progress in school, most of these kids sadly don't achieve the potentials they can achieve. And that's what makes being here different from being there, is that you have methods and ways and resources to make your kid fulfill his potentials here. If he is in Egypt, he's fulfilling his potentials in Egypt. If he's in Pakistan, he's kind of like fulfilling his potentials there. So you have to support your kid based on the resources you have. And just don't hang into kind of like resources in Egypt and apply it to your kid who's living in the States. That's my point. Does that answer your question? Okay. I think we have like a final.
Hi, I'm Adriana Mohammed. I'm a parent that's been in MAPS community or in any Muslim communities. Actually involved with some of the people that were initially on the board of MAPS when it was a seed. But I wanted to talk about why I was invited to talk about my experience as a parent perspective is, I think, because it illustrates a process, right, that people go through and that they may go through. And it's a whole community, right? So autism specifically has ebbs and flows. This is key phrase that I'm going to use throughout this because the number chart, that's the first time I've seen that, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever it is, to me, garbage. Because you know what? At the end of the day, that is going to have ebbs and flows of development, progression, regression throughout their life, just like anyone else on the earth. That is a very important thing, I think, for me as a parent and for many people to understand and accept themselves, which is, well, they're behaving a certain way, they're communicating something, or they're communicating something in a way by their expression. This is just different but the same, and everybody does it every day, with or without autism. We see it everywhere, just like Jim, sorry, it's hard for me to say that, Jim was pointing out. But this is something very important and key for all of us, especially as Muslims, right? Because we are always taught as we need to accept the differences and the sameness because it is all from God. Period. End of story. Right? So that's where we need to start with. We need to start with, as a community, an ummah, which is it is our job. It is our community members' rights on them, on us, that we have to sit up and try to learn more about what is autism, what are disabilities, what are the differences, what are the similarities, what are the strengths, what are the challenges. How can we participate more as a whole, as a community, to strengthen the whatever members, but just our community as a whole? Because I will tell you from personal experience, I went to an alternative elementary school in Seattle, the heart of University District. It actually houses an autism-specific program, ironically, at this time. We got everybody. So we got the kids that spoke foreign languages, special needs kids, bright kids, kids that were advanced. We got everybody, all in a big mix, and I loved it, and I learned a lot. I learned immensely about the differences and the sameness that I had with my peers. That was an invaluable lesson. I always tell my mother, thank you for always, no matter where we moved, we always stayed at that school, because that place always gave me the base that helps me now, right? So, moving on, we're gonna segue now. I'm a mom of 3 kids. My youngest, Hassan, turns 13 today. It is his birthday, hence the reason I brought cookies. So, and refreshments. But I wanted to share it with all of you, my community here, that he's here today, and he is a blessing in many ways that I can't even express all the time. And some people can say, how can you say it's a blessing? How can you say autism is a blessing? I've had that from anyone, not even Muslims, non-Muslims, Muslims, it doesn't matter, and say it's not a blessing, right? And I say, but you know, for me, it is, because it is an opportunity. How I have to see it from a spiritual perspective and a human perspective is that it's an opportunity that I was given and a challenge I was given to work with and to see and to participate in this life. So it's kind of deep and it's out there, but it is an opportunity. And I think if we start changing our thinking, when we see people with anyone with levels of disabilities, which is vast, very vast, by the way, very, very common. It's not just autism, it's multitudes of disabilities. But neurotypical, I agree with the panel. I think most people would say, what is that? What is neurotypical? I hate that reference, but it exists. Bottom line, we all need to do our part. We need to all participate. Whoever's here in this room participating this or gonna watch these lives or YouTube, whatever it is, you all are participating in this, and this is what I thank you for, but we need to continue. It needs to be past this day, and it needs to be ongoing permanently. Why? Because this is our destiny. This is our job, if you wanna put it that strong, and this is what we need to do. So I will talk a little bit more about my path, specifically with Hassan. So Hassan, born, typical child, typical birth, typical everything. 1 year old, wasn't talking. Walking, doing other milestones, other developmental milestones, but not talking, not verbal words. Okay. Pediatrician was telling me, we really need to get him screened. That is a warning sign. That's a red flag. You need to be worried. Said, I'm not gonna worry because his brother, who is 1.5, is 2, 1.5, 2 at the time, wasn't talking full words either. So I was like, maybe he's late. Everybody was telling me that. Total strangers, family, friends, didn't matter. Not everybody's the same. People talk late sometimes. So what? Okay, I moved on. Then I started to notice, okay, at 18 months, he's still not talking. He's still doing everything else he's supposed to do. Super bright, understands everything. Memory of a razor. God help you. Memory of a razor. And I'm telling you, but then finally, I take him to early pre-K. Yeah, he's eligible for that because he doesn't speak words. He has a certain point markers that makes him eligible for early pre-K self-contained classrooms. What's that mean? Special ed classrooms, okay? I have a speech therapist who pulls me aside and says, I really shouldn't tell you this, but I'm going to, because there's red tape in my district and with my union, and I'm not supposed to tell you this, so this is off the record, but I highly recommend that you screen your child for autism. I know that it's hard to even hear me say that to you, and I know you may want to reject that. But in this school, at that district at that time, there is a special autism-specific pre-K program that would be perfect for him. But unfortunately, we have to have, keywords, the diagnosis in order to place him in that class. I learned later that's not true. I did not know that at that time. I did not know who to advocate, who to go to, what questions to ask. How would I know? I didn't know. So I moved on and I said, okay, who do you suggest? She gave me some ideas, some resources. I started hounding Seattle Children's Autism Center. I pretty much showed up every month. And I said, where am I on the list? Where am I on the list? Where am I on the list? So finally they got tired of me and they called me and said, there's a study with Seattle Children's Research Institute. All UW system is all what I call the mother tree, UW. So they said there is a study, it is accredited, it is accepted by school districts, insurance, etc., to be accepted if your child gets a diagnosis of autism, it will be accepted. You could move forward with assistance, resources, help. I said, okay, let me do it. Any cost? No cost. Again, that was a rare moment. It was a study at one point in time. He got the formal diagnosis at 3, between 3 and 4. I was told by his doctor, Dr. Karen Toth, who was very known in the community. She was in the UW system at that time. She's moved on to different systems, but bottom line, her expertise remained. She told me he's a bit late to be starting this, but believe it or not, I went, late? He's only 3. Like, how can you tell me he's late? Like, he's 3 years old. No, actually, there is people who are getting these diagnoses at 18 months, 2 years old. And so it's not too late to do therapy. And it's not too late to do a list, and I literally got a list at the end of the diagnosis paperwork of my homework as part of the study to contact or go or try to elicit any of the resources or ideas or places they gave me on the list to go apply for services, get whatever I could for my son. Come back to us in a year and tell us how things are going. I did. I went back in a year, told her how things are going. Her eyes almost bugged out because she said, wow, you literally were in touch or got services with almost everything on this list. I said, I did. Challenge I'm having is now the school is telling me it's either, because at that time I got ABA, Applied Behavior Analysis Therapy for my child. I was able to do 5 days a week, 3 hours a day. That sounds pretty intensive, right? That's a lot to take in. It was a big adjustment for my family, big adjustment for me, because the model that was used at that particular facility was total parent involvement, every single session, every hour, no matter what, which I personally thought, oh my God, they've got to be kidding. But, you know, I did it because I wanted to do that for him. I was hearing from all the professionals, the speech therapists, the teachers, the people in the community, this is going to make a positive impact, right? This is going to be something he's going to benefit from. You just don't see it immediate, but you will learn to see it over time, and especially if you implement the skills and the methods properly. Whew, it's a lot to take in, you know, a lot to take in. So I said, okay, oh, and by the way, you gotta get speech therapy, occupational therapy, any other kind of therapies for him as well, because he's in deficits in all those areas, because my son is also nonverbal. So I was told, okay, you have a mountain to climb, here's your shoes, get going. So this is exactly what I did. I started the ABA. I was doing school half day, ABA half day. That is a self-decision. I gave that decision to the school. They accepted it for a year. After that year, red tape came. They said, you know, we can't do this anymore. I said, what do you mean can't? Why did I hear the word can't? So, you know, and they said, because the model of this program is not meant for that. It needs to be full day. So you get to choose. Either he does therapy or school. You get to choose. My floor fell out. How do you choose? How do you choose? I found out later I didn't have to choose. I found out later by learning more, years later, that I can advocate for my child and I can tell the team what works best for him in that setting, period. And they have to try to learn to try to comply with that. Again, nobody handed me a manual. No one gave me a brochure. Nobody said, here, go do X, Y, Z steps. I had to learn. I had to talk to people. I had to talk. So he went out without services for a year. His BT, who was an absolute wizard and blessing, she pushed them to bring him back. He came back. Bottom line, I met also someone else who was invaluable to me. I know, we'll finish up in 2 seconds. Was Joe Risto, who is a speech therapist with Seattle Children's Autism Center at the time. She diagnosed him with a Proxy of Speech. I said, what's that? I don't know what that is. It's like speaking another language. You know, this is a neurological condition to my understanding. People can verify this. That makes it where the body and the brain literally can't get words out. And there's varying ebbs and flows and varying levels on what is apraxia, because there's people that can have apraxia and no other disabilities at all. And they can be verbal to a certain degree, but need a lot of therapy to get there, to really get over the hurdle. There's people that are totally nonverbal that need a specific kind of structured therapy. Bottom line, I said, okay, tell me what I gotta do. How do I have to do this? What do I have to do? My experience as a parent when I got that diagnosis, I wanna circle back to that, was confirmation. But I'm also from here, multi-generation, from Washington, American. I grew up with this. I saw it every day at school. I saw it around me in my community. There was nothing but acceptance. I grew up with it, okay? Now, for my husband, who's from Egypt, Giza, okay? Let me tell you, that acceptance was not there. And it was not because he did not love his child. It was not because he did not believe in God. It was because who would want to accept that? Now, it took me years to accept that kind of response, because in me, I was like, what's wrong with you? We just do the therapy, we've got to keep moving. Get over it, you know? But at the end of the day, he can't just get over it, because he's heartbroken, absolutely devastated, heartbroken, Because in his mind, his vision for that infant when they were born, they're going to be a doctor or engineer. They're going to be able to pursue their dreams and abilities, and they're going to be able to help their brother help sustain us and move forward. Wasn't going to happen. May not ever happen. That's a lot for a man, a father, to take in and accept. It took me a long time to accept that response, but I have, and I'm empathetic to it. We've worked through that. I hear the call to prayer, so I'm going to be quiet for a moment. I have to do that. Sorry about that, but people understand here. Thank you. Sorry about that delay. Everybody here would understand. Jim, sorry about that. So we have to stop talking when we hear that then. So I'll wrap it up real quick. What's my vision for my child, right? That's one of the points that is on my to-do, which I appreciate that format. One of my visions for my child is to make him as independent successfully as possible. He is capable of doing a lot. He has an incredible amount of intelligence, but at the end of the day, he's my youngest of 3. So a lot of us are going to be gone by the time he needs help. How do I put my head around that? How do I, what do I do? It's all the what's. The what's. What do I do? How do I do? How am I going to do this? Strategizing. There's a lot of resources out there, by the way. We can talk about it at the end, or if anybody needs help, I can talk to people about that. The what ifs, hows, where's, what's. That's my vision. And I'm also trying to make him as successfully independent. What does that mean? I'm trying to make sure he can dress himself, cook small meals, do laundry, basic life skills everybody needs. Every single person on this planet needs. But I'm trying to make him as successful in it, as independent as possible. Why? So now when I hand him off to someone else, they will know what to do with him. Sorry. But circling back to our community, we all need to do more. It does not matter if you have a formal diagnosis of autism in your family, whoever that is, or a disability, it doesn't matter. What matters is that we all participate in learning about what those disabilities are and what is similar and what is different, and that is okay. And that is okay, and that we all just need to accept it and move on and do what's best for individuals around us that need the supports. So inshallah, we're all going to work and strive to that, and we all can share that with Muslim or non-Muslim members. It doesn't matter. It just matters that we do it, that we participate in it actively, and that we voice that to our imams, to our community members, to our leaders, especially, to get more training on what are these disabilities, how to help get resources, even it's supplying a laundry list of resources for people to go to. If somebody comes randomly up to them and says, oh, I think something's wrong with your kid, and maybe they have autism, for people to learn to go, you know what, maybe they do, who knows? But you know what, there's help for that. It's okay, let's talk about it. That needs to be the response in our community, broadly. Instead of, they don't know what they're talking about, or they always single out my kid, or they, nothing's wrong with my kid. Nothing, absolutely nothing is wrong with them, and nothing is wrong with them. They are perfect how they are, how God made them to be. But they do need help, and their family needs help, their siblings need help, their mom needs help, their dad needs help. The whole system, nucleus, needs help, and first part is facing it. So inshallah, we all do that tonight, and we all help our community members, regardless of who they are or how they are. Well, no matter what color, religion, race, ethnicities, I don't care. At this point, really, we all just need to do our part. So thank you for hearing us out. Does anybody want to recap or continue? Yes.
Assalamu alaikum. So I just had a quick question about, first of all, autism has definitely exploded. I mean, when I was growing up, I didn't have any autistic kids in my class. I had never even heard the word, and now it's just so prevalent. What's the reason for that? I've heard that by 2050, it'll be 1 in 2 children having autism. Why is it mainly in boys? And what's the cause? A lot of doctors are saying that the MMR vaccine has caused it. Like, a lot of people, their child was perfectly fine, everything was fine, and they say as soon as they got the MMR vaccine, their child just regressed, and they lost their speech. Can I? Yeah. MMR. Okay. Yeah, a lot of people are saying their child was absolutely fine. Nothing was wrong with them. They were developing. As soon as that happened, like, a lot of doctors are saying that, a lot of parents are saying that. And as far as the cure is concerned, people are saying that it's heavy metals in the vaccines, aluminum, and that was what was causing it. And when they detox the heavy metals, it reduces inflammation in the brain. And people have found that alternative modalities have cured children of autism. So, I mean, it's great that we're talking about, like, how to help them. But my question is why can't we talk about prevention and also cure?
So thank you. These are very, very good points. So let's start about prevention. Sadly, there is nothing to do to prevent autism. It's a neurodevelopmental disease. It's like the basic structure. It's just like their brain are at the molecular level, at the tiny level, is just different. They are born with it. Good. So that's a good question. Yes. So let's start with the vaccine, because this is very, very important. Okay. So vaccine don't cause autism. The long story short, it was kind of like a fake doctor, or like a doctor who made the research, and then after that debunked, and he lost his medical license. It's just like, and the subculture caught on that, kind of like media-wise, but vaccines do not cause autism. Autism is a neurodevelopmental disease. It doesn't relate it to vaccine. It doesn't relate to heavy metals in vaccine. That has been researched extensively. I don't remember the name, but it's kind of like very famous. It's just like he. Yeah.
This is the study, yeah.
I'm not sure about the exact statistic, but like it kind of like it's just something that they are born with it without kind of like a reason.
So it's in utero, in the womb. Yeah.
Why were the children fine until they got the vaccine, and so many parents are saying
That's not
they've
true.
seen it?
No, that's kind of like they have just debunked that as a whole. So comes the question about why the diagnosis is just because now we have better diagnostic.
It's a good point, because it is a good point.
Yeah.
It is something to talk about, because it's part of the myths and facts. And who funds those myths and facts is important sources to research for yourself. That's very important to research that those trials, that's a key component.
The other way around. What happens if he's the one who is right, but everybody else is?
The thing,
That's what I've heard.
Well, and if that's the
If you
case,
watch Vaxxed, have you seen that?
so that is kind of like,
Vaxxed too. It's all about this.
and that's kind of like all just like, you know, it's interesting how we kind of like latch to the outcast stuff and kind of like things that look suspicious appears longer, but like there is a lot of research that has been done after that, and there is no
clinical trials.
But what about the doctors who are, curing it and like?
See,
Um,
that's a very dangerous thing to say, in my personal opinion, of saying cure. I think I'd have to see heavy, heavy documentation, clinical documentation. When I say clinical, I'm talking trials in labs. We're talking like actual facts.
Why do you need a trial? Why can't you have anecdotal? Okay, this doctor has.
Because that's not sufficient to say that that's curing.
If that was your trial and he got better, isn't that good enough?
it's so the
I understand the argument
No.
that you're correct in saying I'm proposing that. You are perfectly right to propose what ifs,
Right.
and we should. We all should. We all should look at why is this more prevalent or talk about. It's not so much prevalent as, and there is more of an occurrence of it, but there's also more diagnosis, actual tools and methods to actually diagnose this and actually call it what it is. I can't tell you how many wacky things that I've heard about from people that are like, oh, well, they just have a quirk, or they're a little wacky, they're a little different. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that growing up. I'm almost 50 years old. My grandfather was 85 when he passed in 2020. He had heard that for his whole life. People that were different, wacky, had quirks.
we can talk about kind of like
It's a
the
whole topic, and you have right to question it, and you should. But I encourage you to look for the clinical, factual information on both sides, and really instead of seeing, is it on Netflix or whatever, Vax, the program that you're talking about? Yes. It was on Netflix?
Uh,
Or do you know where you saw it?
It was on.
Was it on Netflix? Okay. Whatever program you were watching, find out who funded that.
and I can talk to you about like all this kind of like clinical and how like clinical research is done, but after the prayers. If you have a question.